I'm Liz Faublas, and this is Currents. It may be campaign season, but this exit poll is all about the church. Plus, are Catholics all over the place when it comes to their faith?
This is testimony to the fact that we believe that modes of God's presence anchored us in life.
And almost 5 months later, the challenges of the new Mass translation.
This is the question. Will this new translation bring us closer to God here and as a church community? Who can say at this time? That's going to take a few years to see.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Dissatisfied with homilies, too many appeals for money, feeling betrayed by the clergy abuse scandal. Certainly not an encouraging checklist. In fact, according to a survey, these are just some of the reasons many Catholics are discouraged with the church. So much so, more and more are making the decision to abandon the faith altogether. Empty Pews, a survey of Catholics regarding decrease in Mass attendance, was conducted by Jesuit Father William Byron, a professor of business and society at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia, and Charles Zech, professor of economics and director of the Center for the Study of Church Management at Villanova University's Business School. Now, their non-scientific study applied a business management principle of using the exit poll to interview people who are leaving the church in order to learn what is driving so many away. It's the same process a business would use to understand why they're losing customers or profit. Now, I spoke with Father Byron earlier today, and he presented even more details about why so many Catholics are disenchanted with the church and what can be done to hopefully reverse this trend. Father Byron, how did the idea for the Empty Pews survey come about?
Well, I heard Larry Bossidy, retired chairman of Honeywell, give a talk about church management and needs for church management. And he had seen a report from the Pew Research Center that there was a sharp decline in attendance at Sunday Mass for Catholics. And he said, if that was a business, they'd be conducting exit interviews. And that struck me as a pretty good idea. I wrote an article about a year ago under a headline of On Their Way Out, what exit interviews could teach us about lapsed Catholics. And that got an enormous response. And one of the people that read it was the Bishop of Trenton, New Jersey, David O'Connell, who I know very well, and he contacted me and he said, how about doing one here? So we went off and did it in the fall, last fall, 2011. And the results of that interview, of that project, are in his hands, have been for a couple of months.
And it incorporates a business management principle, as you mentioned. You interviewed about 300 people to determine why so many are leaving the church. Now, what did this small sampling reveal in terms of specifics?
Well, a lot of things. No one thing specifically, but the clergy sex abuse scandal, mishandling of it really bothered people. The barring of divorced and remarried Catholics from reception of the sacraments, that's a big concern. The perception that gay and lesbian Catholics are not welcome at Mass, that's an obstacle. The quality, poor quality, low quality of homilies and music, the kind of dullness of Catholic Mass for many, that was part of it. Some people said they didn't really feel they were part of a community. They were just alone in a crowd when they went to Mass, and they were looking for more of a sense of community. The aloofness, and in the view of some, the arrogance of priests, that did not help. One kind of horror story was that a woman said the local parish priest refused to go to the cemetery to bury her 9-year-old boy because the cemetery was not a Catholic cemetery. You know, that's outrageous. And the response of the church, in most cases localized to the parish, to needs, was offensive and off-putting to people. So
and Father, I don't mean to interrupt, because you actually do bring up a great point. You point out in your study that based on responses, the ones you just gave, what are called non-negotiable church teachings, it points to the need for more pastoral and clear explanation of what the church teaches and why.
Yeah, that's right. Now, they're all not non-negotiables. I mean, if the homilies are poor, something can be done about that. if the quality of music is poor, something can be done about that. But the fact that the church is perceived to be unlistening, uninterested, not responsive to what lay people are saying, and certainly the lack of transparency in the management of money and in the follow-up to the management of the clergy sex abuse scandal. All of those are there. Now, if somebody was said, I no longer believe in the divinity of Christ, you say, okay, tough. I'd like to talk to you about that. Maybe we could do a better job explaining it, but that's a non-negotiable. When I chatted with Bishop O'Connell after it was done, I told him, I said, look, these people have chosen to separate themselves, for the most part, from the Eucharist. So that's saying to you, you've got to do a better job of catechizing people on an understanding of the Eucharist. And I think he's certainly going to be doing that.
Father Byron, you say that church leaders really need to take these answers to heart. How can the findings of your survey be applied to help stem the tide of the faithful leaving the church, now that we have some idea what is fueling these losses?
Well, one of the most telling comments that we had was from a guy who said, he was probably in his early 70s, late 60s, he said, in this diocese, if you ask a priest a question, all you're going to get is a rule. You don't get a, let's sit down and talk about it. Well, I think there's going to be a lot more sitting down and talking about it in Trenton as a result of this study.
And that's very important. Thank you so much, Father Byron, for this very, very interesting topic. We'll certainly be following it, and thank you for joining us.
You're quite welcome.
And when we return, the governments in Asia have Catholics in a stranglehold. I'll explain that and give you the rest of the day's headlines after the break. Welcome back to Currents. The contraception mandate points to a pattern of attacks on religious liberty. That assessment from Philadelphia Archbishop Charles Chaput. The head of the Philly Archdiocese tells Catholic News Agency that the national leadership has been more hostile to religious freedom than any other administration in recent memory. Chaput spoke with Catholic News Agency following the release of his new ebook, A Heart on Fire, Catholic Witness and the Next America. Chaput says the ongoing debate over the contraception mandate is not an isolated incident. The Archbishop actually completed his ebook before the current controversy arose. And Archbishop Chaput has approved the recommendations of the Strategic Planning Committee in his archdiocese to merge parishes. In a statement, he says the restructuring will be a challenge for many families and individuals. Chaput says the process is needed and will help every parish more effectively promote the gospel. U.S. bishops want to help re-energize Catholics. The Bishops' Conference has released a new document titled Disciples, Call to Witness, the New Evangelization. It focuses on reaching out to Catholics whether they practice or not. Green Bay Bishop David Ricken, who chairs the Bishops' Committee on Evangelization and Catechesis, says every Catholic is called to spread the gospel, which he describes as a personal encounter with the person of Jesus. Well, a dissident who garnered plenty of attention during Pope Benedict's trip to Cuba is back in custody. Rome Reports has more on that.
Cuban police have once again arrested political dissident Andrés Carrión after releasing him last Friday. Officials reportedly made him promise not to give interviews and not take part in political meetings that oppose the government. During Benedict XVI's visit, Andrés Carrión shouted, "Down with communism, end the dictatorship," while standing very close to Raúl Castro before the papal mass was celebrated at the Antonio Maceo Plaza in Santiago de Cuba. According to sources, Andrés Carrión was on the list of opponents that Benedict XVI was trying to help during his meeting with Raúl Castro. The website martinoticias.com reports that Carrión has been arrested again after meeting with a group of opponents to take part in a public protest.
And meanwhile, authorities in China have released 2 bishops from China's so-called underground Catholic Church. According to a source, one of the bishops was given a brainwashing class on China's religious policies. He was reportedly taken on a tour of a southwestern province of China. During the tour, he was introduced to an excommunicated bishop who was ordained without the Vatican's approval. A priest in Vietnam is in a coma after being severely beaten. According to Asia News, a group of thugs with the help of police stormed a Catholic orphanage, damaging the building and beating up the children there. A resident in the area says the perpetrators also attacked an altar of the Madonna. The priest was beaten after he spoke up for the children. Well, we may not have heard anything from him during the primary season, but House Speaker John Boehner says he's supporting Mitt Romney.
Well, you know, I've not taken a position on this presidential campaign because as chairman of the convention, I wanted to make sure that all candidates had a fair process and a fair opportunity. But it's clear now that Mitt Romney is going to be our nominee. I think Mitt Romney has a set of economic policies that can put Americans back to work and, frankly, contrast sharply with the failed economic policies of President Obama.
Boehner, who is Catholic, says he will be proud to support Romney and will do everything he can to help the former Massachusetts governor win in November. Well, friends of the Minnesota couple on board the capsized Italian cruise ship say they are relieved the couple's bodies have been identified. According to reports, the husband and wife were active members of their parish, St. Pius X Parish in White Bear Lake. Their bodies were recovered last month and identified through DNA testing. In all, 32 people died, 64 others were injured, and 2 are still missing. Well, it may be a far cry from their old building, but worshippers at an Anglican cathedral in New Zealand will have a new place to go. Reporter Ali Pugh has the story.
This is the church that will replace the Christchurch Cathedral for the next 20 years.
The cathedral in the city has a message for all the citizens.
The transitional cathedral, seating up to 700 people, is the work of emergency architect Shaiguru Ban. It's a temporary structure featuring more than 200 cardboard tubes.
The technology that's gone into this and with the architects, the way they've designed the cathedral, it will be structurally sound, without a doubt.
The site for the new building is this empty block bordering the red zone. Before the earthquake, it was home to the city's earliest stone church, St. John's on Latimer Square.
It's sustainable, it's an affordable building, it's a good example of what can be done in post-disaster environments.
It also faces the CTV site, where 115 people died 14 months ago. Those behind the $5 million structure say it'll be a magnet for international visitors and also provide hope for locals, including Cathedral chorister Andrew Garbutt.
And asked my parents if I could come.
And what do you think?
I think it will be nice.
With construction beginning next week, the cathedral's set to be completed in time for Christmas.
And that report from Ali Pugh. Elsewhere, the leader of a breakaway traditionalist group has reportedly a message for his priests. According to the Vatican Insider website, Bishop Bernard Fillet, the head of the Society of St. Pius X, says there are no definitive plans regarding the group's possible return to the Catholic Church. According to the Vatican Insider, Fillet says the society is standing by 2 principles. They will not make concessions regarding faith, and the society will be allowed to act autonomously. According to media reports, a decision from the Vatican is imminent. And finally, the #1 Catholic book is UCAT. The Catechism of the Catholic Church for Young People has sold more than 1.5 million copies, making it the #1 selling Catholic book around the world. Ignatius Press publishes the English language edition for the U.S. Ignatius founder, Father Joseph Fessio, says the sales so far are just the beginning. Stay tuned, there's more Currents ahead.
A new perspective on what it means to be grounded in the faith.
I can choose the horizon of beauty. I can choose the horizon of strength. Be my guest. But they're not permanent poles. They will leave you upset.
Welcome back. Well, it's one faith, but expressed in many ways. According to one man, they are bipolar expressions of the faith that is Catholicism. At a recent Theology on Tap in Queens, he presented a unique perspective on how these many sacraments and sacramentals, along with figures from the church's history, have helped people stay grounded in the faith.
Why should you be a Catholic? Well, for this very reason is that people think Catholics are crazy. This is testimony to the fact that we believe that modes of God's presence anchored us in life.
We're here at Oktoberfest in Forest Hills for a Theology on Tap with Mr. Carl Semler. He's a principal out on the island, and he's going to talk about the bipolar expressions of faith for Catholics.
When I say bipolar, I would almost use that as a synonym of mode. That when somebody gives, like think of a multiple personality disorder, you have all of these poles that are from yourself without reducing yourself. But picture like authentic modes of your essence, that they're really like bipolar expressions of yourself. The topic is bipolar expressions of faith and those crazy Catholics. I'm going to be speaking about how we learn the most about ourselves when we encounter other people or encounter real symbols in our lives. And these are poles, like a North Pole, like a true anchor, an anchor in our lives to give us perspective in the changing sands of time. And I'm trying to make a case for the fact that the Catholic Church has had constants over 2,000 years. And those are really part of the poles, part of the constants that have really been taught to us by Jesus Christ through the sacraments. One of the greatest things about the sacraments is not only is God giving you a gift of the sacraments, but he's contained in the sacraments.
A sacrament for a Roman Catholic is an effective sign of God's grace. And what that means is that it's something that we experience that changes us inwardly so that we can outwardly express God and Christ's love. And a sacramental is something that brings us to that sacrament. It might be a rosary bead, a scapula, a holy water, something that brings us closer to God.
I can choose the horizon of beauty. I can choose the horizon of strength. Be my guest. But they're not permanent poles. They will leave you upset. Because you're going to get old, you're going to get ugly, and you're going to die. It's going to happen. People are, their pole or their anchor or their directional compass is really, I want to be young forever, I want to be beautiful forever, and they'll do anything to reach that. But that's not a real anchor, that's not a real pole. Money comes and goes, houses come and go. So while I think sometimes people see believers as a little bit crazy, I think we stand the test of time.
Experiencing Christ through the sacraments, that is an anchor that can't be moved, can't be taken away from us. I found that very reassuring tonight.
Seeing the contrast really helped me to appreciate why that's so important, why these things are so important for us to have as Catholics, and why we need to believe in them and be enriched by them.
I think too many Catholics are apologetic in the bad sense of the word. Like, I believe this, and gee, I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend anybody. Where I would like them to have an enthusiasm and a pride about what they believe, so that they could really hold their head up high and really try to stay on the road, stay on the straight path.
Stay tuned. There's more Currents ahead.
How well do you know the new sound of the Mass?
That some people are looking for what the Latin originally meant, and they don't find it in the liturgy, and they therefore think that it's a bad translation because they're using scientific criteria to judge it.
Finally tonight, if you've been paying attention, you notice there have been some significant changes at Mass. The language as we've known it for the past 40 years was given an overhaul in the form of a new English translation of the liturgies. The new version was introduced here in the U.S. on the first Sunday of Advent with words like consubstantial and the phrase, and with your spirit. Part of the new Mass, the process of change was a meticulous one. Last night at Fordham University, a group of experts provided their insight into the challenges and the intricacies of the publication of the latest Roman Missal.
We thought this would be our contribution to the discussion, and we wanted to hold it as an academic conference on the significance of language in the liturgy would make a unique contribution in our New York City area.
Recent changes to the English translation of the Roman Missal have raised renewed awareness of the important role language plays in worship.
To be clear, the changes are slight.
The Mass is not new, it is not changed at all. The only thing that really is changed is the translations of the prayers themselves.
Why does the new translation choose to use more technical words? Words such as consubstantial, incarnate, and even prevenient grace. It was thought that the first translation, while quite good, didn't really capture all of the nuances and, as I said earlier, scriptural allusions and patristic quotations that are found in the original Latin text of the Roman Missal, and so it was thought that a retranslation effort could be helpful.
In 2001, a different approach to translation. It was that it needed to be as close as possible to the Latin translation and the structure of the Latin prayers.
A lot of conflict comes from the fact that some people are looking for what the Latin originally meant, and they don't find it in the liturgy, and they therefore think that it's a bad translation because they're using scientific criteria to judge it. If you're trying to put together a liturgy, one of the questions you want to ask is this going to be a good liturgy? Is this going to be conducive to worship? Is it going to be successful? Is it going to be something people will be able to relate to? Hosanna in the highest, for example. We all know what it means, but that's only because we already know what it means. If you are not at church, if you've never been to church, if you know nothing about church language, Hosanna in the highest wouldn't mean anything to you. That's not even really English. So that's a pretty bad scientific translation and a really good religious translation.
Maybe they're saying it's kind of a response to a growing secularism that's in our society. That liturgy, the language of liturgy, shouldn't be colloquial or casual. It should be a bit more exalted.
This is the question. Will this new translation bring us closer to God here and as a church community? Who can say at this time? That's going to take a few years to see. It still rings funny in our ears.
Right now, I think it's still a little bit of a hindrance, but I think it's slowly growing towards helping us grow closer to God.
As John Henry Newman once said, to be human is to change, but to be holy is to have changed often. And so I think ultimately this is an opportunity for us as a church through this process of change to grow in holiness and understanding.
Don't limit yourself to the verbal changes alone. The whole tradition has always gone beyond the verbal. Consider it all: the body at prayer, music, processions, silence. In life, one rarely gets do-overs, and I see this as kind of an opportunity, a gift, if you will, for us to have a do-over. It's our watch. Let's seize it and not let it slip away.
Well, when it comes to the new Mass translation, one thing is certain: practice makes perfect. That is all for this edition of Currents. Now, coming up tomorrow, we meet married couples looking to make their families bigger. Until then, be sure to visit us online at currentsny.net. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Liz Faublas. Thank you for watching and have a great night.